Good evening. My name is Calvin Yu, and I'm going to give a presentation on surface relaxation and the brain. So, first of all sounds are fundamentally patterns. So, what our auditory system is actually doing is actually processing and recognizing patterns. Now, there is no such thing as a pure wave. Every wave has fundamental frequency, and so it's going to have all these dimensions of sounds within it, especially musical tones, which are full of overtones. For example, in the diagram below, this is, you guessed it, the overtones for a clarinet. And so as you can see, the clarinet obviously is a complex sound with many overtones, and then these which are not going to be the same as any other instrument, especially since the 12th instead of octave overtones, or general sounds in the environment. How does our brain process sound? Well, first of all, the sound has to go into the ear through the pinna, and then from there it goes into the three bones: the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And from the stirrup, the sound gets into the cochlea, where it's getting converted from air into a liquid form. Next, 50,000 hair cells are getting shaken up, turning the liquid into energy. From there, the energy releases ion channels which turn into neurotransmitters. And those neurotransmitters go down to cochlear nerve, which is comparable to the optic nerve in the eye. And from there, it gets processed in the primary auditory cortex into the opposite side hemisphere. So, in other words, from the right ear, it goes into the left primary auditory cortex, and vice versa. So next, the information goes into a tonotopic representation, where topographically organized mapping of different frequencies of sounds that are represented in a particular region of the brain. Next, you recognize the sound through rate coding, which is the system by which information about different frequencies is coded by rate of firing of neurons in the auditory system. Now, to process and perceive a complex sound, it's going to go into the anterior of the primary auditory cortex. For processing of the perception of the form, it's going to go into the posterior of the cortex. So, music, first of all, we have to understand, is a very complex combination of patterns. So, in order to be able to perceive music, it requires recognition of sequences of pitch and rhythms, because each unique sound causes a very different set of neuron firing sequences within the brain, and also substantial memory capacity. The brain areas involved in making music include the association auditory cortex, which recognizes the complex sounds, the inferior frontal cortex, which recognizes harmony, the right auditory cortex, which recognizes the fundamental beat of the music, the left auditory cortex, which recognizes the rhythmic mini-pulse over the fundamental beat, the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, which recognizes timing of musical rhythms. And often the visual cortex is also very much involved. And you also have the activation of anywhere from 1 to 18 gyrus areas. all of which control the specific spectrums of emotions. So, in other words, processing the affiliation of emotions with the sound. These are the primary parts involved, but because the of the network effect of this type of information, it's going to go through the rest of the brain as well. So what are some of the benefits of music? So there are characteristics of music which benefit people. Some examples: neural response and processing all across the brain is as much as 2 times or more, even greater than typical people. Also, the auditory cortex mass was 130% larger in musicians versus non-musicians. And you can confirm these studies in the Schneider 2002 study. All areas involved with movement, including the basal ganglia, or such as, are affected as well. Visual and auditory coordination is increased in those who are quite exposed to music. Music also increases memory capacity and ability, as well as emotional capacity, and also the aspects and the growth of emotions. Okay, and in addition, music can be used to learn to redirect focus, because music is so multitasking. Now, there are certainly other ones. Can you think of any? And these are just some of the basic ones. Alright, so let's read about relaxation. And why does it work so well for relaxation if it's causing so much processing in the brain? I'm going to read this quote to you. Music has been shown to activate at least 6 pathways in the brain. 1. The brain's stem reflexes. 2. Implicit associations with emotional events. 3. Emotional overall effect from voice-like emotional sounds. 4. Visual imagery. 5. Episode memory. And 6. Musical expectancy. Okay? So, first of all, we have to recognize that relaxation, even on the surface, it still is affecting at the inner brain or the cerebral level. For example, the hippocampus, the parahippocampus, temporal lobe, etc., etc., etc. Now, what is the main activity for the brain to evolve to produce relaxation? The key is alpha waves activity. So you've heard of the 4 waves: alpha, delta, beta, and theta. The alpha one, in terms of hertz, it's about 8 to 12 hertz, so it's moderately active, so medium frequency. This one is produced when the brain is resting. So for example, if you close your eyes for an extended period of time, you're going to notice you naturally probably feel a little sleepier. That's because when you close your eyes, your brain starts processing the alpha waves. Okay? Alpha waves activity is not involved in being aroused or excited, for example, being scared, as some of you can testify, or engage in strenuous mental activity. So, for example, doing a theory homework, for example. Now, there are 2 types of alpha waves. We have the one that is involved in meditation, in relaxation, for example, meditation specifically, among other types of relaxation activities. We also have the other one that's involved in rapid eye movement. So, you guys don't know about REM, where you go into paralysis, start making animal noises. You and your mind starts going crazy and going to a new reality, that everything that happened during the daytime, the sensations at the moment, uh, become convolutedly alive, and so. Kind of like a Alice in Wonderland type of reality. So yeah. So when we sleep, we're just we're just crazy for sleeping. Okay. And so anyhow, so service relaxation, among other things, at the neurological level, it's about getting the brain to release the alpha waves to help you relax. Now, what are some things to consider? Well, you have to think about the environment because first of all, we don't want a stressful environment, but also the visual and auditory correlation, right? We have to take that into account. So the visual aspects as well as the auditory aspects both have to be quite relaxing. And also, mm, well, stress is actually being shown. It not only triggers adrenaline, norepinephrine, and other neurotransmitters to trigger fight and flight, but also kills brain cells. So on a neurological level, stress literally creates a fight for survival on the cellular level mainly, right? And also, you have to think about relaxation techniques. The key to all relaxation techniques, and you especially notice this in something like meditation, they're all themed around learning to redirect focus. So, music for surface relaxation should be the same. Mm, music with higher and faster frequencies, like, let's just take for example the oboe or the piccolo, or in my case, the E flat clarinet. They're very unlikely to have a calming effect, and the reason why is just simply because with a higher and faster frequency, it's a lot more processing, and it's generally speaking not a type of processing that is relaxing for general population. So, can you think of other things to think about? And there's one last discussion point I want to bring up. Amnesia. This is a musical disorder, and I repeat, a musical disorder where one cannot process pitches or recognize and remember music. Usually, it's caused by brain damage, but it can be a congenital condition. So, in other words, hereditary. It affects about 2 to 4% of the general population. So, some of the consequences for suffering from amnesia would be um, mainly social isolation. For example, they, those type of people, they can't go out to a dance. Mm, it's very difficult to enjoy concerts, and in general, it's also going to be harder to recognize and remember oral information as well. In general, just because, well, it's just difficult to recognize and remember music, and since music is complex sound, generally speaking, is complex sound. So, in general, complex sounds are just hard to recognize and remember. And there are other consequences as well, but this is just some of them. So, is this population a lost cause? Personally, I don't believe for a second there's such thing as a person who cannot benefit from music. But I just want to make it to the point of discussion. Is this a lost cause?